Good Monday, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Manny Rodriguez. I'm your host with Mondays with Manny. Special thanks to Business Science Magazine, our sponsor always, 305 Publishing, the OBM Alliance, and of course, my colleagues at Bueno Ventures. This is a special Mondays with Manny because we have for the second time a guest, Dr. Christian Koch. Welcome, Christian. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, Manny. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing fine, buddy. I'm doing fine. I'm super excited to have you. We do have a live audience as well, so super excited to get their questions answered at the end. So we will do a Q&A for those who join us live at the end of the recording. The Q&A will not be recorded. That's only for our special folks that join us live. For those of us joining us in the recording, thank you very much for listening in. Hope you really enjoy this. So without further ado, let's get into it. The topic of today is actually the dissertation project that Christian just finished up at the University of South Florida, Muma College of Business, getting his doctorate of business administration. The title of his project, as you can see, he's going to be presenting some information that I think the world over needs to listen to. So hopefully this gets a good audience. But the project is titled the Warren Buffett Project, a qualitative study on Warren Buffett. So without further ado, I am going to kick it off. I might throw in a couple of questions here and there, Christian, but I definitely, I've seen you present this before. I think it's brilliant work. And I would love for you to share it with the audience here. And like I said, I'll chime in with a couple of questions here and there in the moment to make it, conversational. But feel free to kick us off. And without further ado, Dr. Christian Koch.
Okay, well, thank you, Manny. And I think this is a perfect forum. The Business Science Magazine does a really good job of, talking about business kind of meets science. And this is really kind of what the Warren Buffett project was. We had a unique opportunity to really get into the mind of Warren Buffett using qualitative research. Most, finance, academic research on finance is all quantitative driven. It's all statistical driven. And this project was very unique in that we were able to use a lot of textual data to really understand Buffett's investment principles. And we did that because the research question we were trying to answer is that his principles or his investment philosophy, if you will, is really not taught in academia. The modern portfolio theory and a lot more quantitative research or quantitative methods from an investment standpoint is taught. And so we thought there was a big gap here to research. So let me just kind of level the playing field for everybody. And I know people know who Warren Buffett is, but I don't know if people know the scope of what he's done over a 50-year period. So we'll go to the next slide. And this just kind of gives everybody an overview. So, Buffett started Berkshire Hathaway in 1965. I mean, it was over 50 years ago. And he bought this kind of schlocky little, textile company, and he turned it into, a multi-billion-dollar operating, conglomerate in essence that has very familiar brand names that everybody knows: Dairy Queen, Geico, Fruit of the Loom, Duracell, and many others. So it's quite amazing what he's done in that time period. But what makes Berkshire very unique is that he also operates a marketable securities portfolio where he makes direct equity investments. And some of his large holdings are Coca-Cola, American Express, Wells Fargo, and Kraft Heinz. So that's what he has done. And that will kind of level set kind of who Buffett is and what he's accomplished.
A super impressive portfolio, if I can say that. I mean, who wouldn't want that kind of portfolio these days, right? Those companies are amazing.
And Buffett's claim to fame over time is he has really moved towards how to invest in brand companies, how to invest in companies that have a brand that have some durability over 10 or 20-year periods. But from an engaged scholarship standpoint, and that's really, what Business Science Magazine is focused on, we're focusing on real world problems. So what I said before is we really found that, Buffett's, methodology or investment principles are not taught at universities and colleges, and they're not really preparing investment professionals, successfully. So at some level, business schools have failed in the finance area, and so we want to kind of develop that or research that further. So we saw that there was an interesting gap. So the next slide. So what we did here is I started in the DBA program in 2018 with you, Manny, and we found a very unique data source called the Warren Buffett Archive. And so the research question was, what major themes could we extract or understand from this large archive, which has about 25 years of data from Berkshire Hathaway. And next slide.
If memory serves, it was quite the archive. Like it was like the Indiana Jones find in the finance world, right?
I like that. That's actually very true. I felt like I was a Indiana Jones sometimes, discovering new things. But this is it's a public website. It just came about in May of 2018, so only 2 years ago. And, that's really the power and the uniqueness of our research is that, we're using these videos and these audio transcripts of what Buffett has said over a 25-year period to really get into his head. So the next slide. So this gives you just a little bit more meat on the bones. Here, it's data that was pulled from all public information. The website is public at buffett.cnbc.com. And the site contains 26 full Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting videos, full transcripts dating back to 1994, 130 hours of searchable video, and about 2,800 pages of transcripts. And as I said, it was started in May 2018. We only looked at 11 years. So we have a whole nother kind of data set that we could dive into at some point in time. But
so that's part two of the research.
Part two of the research is, doing the other side of what we didn't do. But there was so much data that we had to kind of limit the scope. So if you go to the next slide, we actually did 11 years. This is kind of the qualitative research design approach that we used. You can see it's fairly scientific. We used a qualitative research method. We used a lot of data collection techniques using a software program called NVivo. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And then we coded, kind of line by line or different topics or different themes. And then we put together, a 120-page dissertation. So it was both very rigorous and relevant. And you can go to the next slide. But it really tilts, you kind of balance rigor and relevancy, but our research really tilts towards kind of the relevant angle, meaning, what's the practical contribution that Buffett has made to the investment management industry? How is it relevant to business practitioners, like myself? How can we use his principles in our practice with clients every day? So the next slide, if you can look at that, this kind of gives you an overlay of exactly what we did. So we looked at, on the left there, that shows you all 11 transcripts in the years. So each year consists of 6 hours of Buffett talking, having a Q&A session. So again, you can see the breadth and the depth of kind of each transcript. We went through each of those. We looked at both the video and the transcription data, and we came up with 7 themes. Those are at the bottom right there. but we really wrote about and explored from an academic standpoint 2 themes: the academic community and his investment process. And it was just, is pretty exciting in terms of what the takeaways were. So
And
if you go to the next slide.
Christian, this actually triggers a question. Just a curiosity. As you were going through these transcripts, which was probably just an amazing amount of detail, and verbatims, quote, just one paragraph after another of the discussions that were happening. Looking at some of the years of the transcripts, I'm just curious if at any time did like natural disasters or economic disasters or world disasters like come into the discussion as it relates to thinking about investments and thinking about the economy in these transcripts? Did that ever come up?
It did. And so my recollection is Buffett talked a lot about the 1972-74 period as being one of the best periods to invest, meaning, the market was down and it was like, shooting fish in the barrel. And then he also talked about the 2008-9, financial crisis period. But he said it, in that context, it wasn't as good as, the 72-74 period.
Gotcha.
So yes, I mean, one of the key takeaways of our research was Buffett says, hold cash because strange things happen in the market. So I think, most investment managers or most, 401k managers are always fully invested 100%, whether it's stocks, bonds, whatever. But what Buffett has done is he has held cash to take advantage of these situations that you just asked me about. And he got a lot of pushback the last few years. I think Berkshire Hathaway has about 125 billion with a B of cash that he hasn't deployed. And I think it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of kind of, personal discipline not to invest that cash and to wait for markets like 72, 74, 2008, 2009, and markets like March of 2020. The last time I was on your show, it was in March. The price of oil was going to zero. The market was going to zero. And now, it's 3 months later and the market's recovered. We still have COVID and going through some of those issues, but clearly the market is recovered and people's fears about COVID and the financial crisis were maybe a little bit overblown.
Yeah, it's amazing what just a handful of months does, right? Not even a handful of months, like 3 months, the world changes and then kind of comes back. It's amazing.
So what Buffett has done over time is he's arbitraged time, meaning most investment managers have a very narrow, time horizon, maybe less than 2 or 3 years. And so they're very focused on short-term results and companies that will deliver those results in less than 3 years. What Buffett has done with his investments with Amex and Coca-Cola and Gillette is he's arbitraged that over a 15, 20-year period, meaning he's looking at the business over a much longer period and doesn't care about those results in the short term. So I think in March when he had, or in April or in May when he had his annual Berkshire meeting, he made a comment like, I don't care about, he was looking at McDonald's and he said, I don't care about, the number of hamburgers that people are eating today. It's how many hamburgers am I going to eat over my lifetime? So again, it's that time arbitrage and where he's been so successful.
Very interesting.
Next slide. These are really my kind of 6 critical findings of all all the 11 years of my research. And I'll start with the top and then go to the right. And I have a couple quotes I'll read to you from Buffett, so hopefully your audience will enjoy those. But the first and the critical one is pure rejection of this thing called efficient market theory. And efficient market theory was started by a couple folks at the University of Chicago. And it really says that the stock market is, fully priced all the time, and it's never, underpriced or overpriced. It's always efficient is my point. And I think, we've highlighted 72, 74, 2008, 2009, and March of this year, where clearly there's been mispricings and people's fears have driven things down. And, the tech bubble could say the same thing on the upside. So Buffett really fully rejects this whole efficient market theory, which most students in business schools are taught. That's kind of investments 101. And so Buffett says, and I'll quote here, he says, "It would have been like learning that the earth was flat. You would have had the wrong start in life," unquote. And that really rings true. I mean, think about it. All these students that are going through finance class and graduating with finance degrees really think the earth is flat. They really think markets are efficient. And I think they're mostly efficient, but then there's times when there's huge inefficiencies. So, that's the foundational or the core belief. It's kind of like the first commandment that Buffett rejects that most practitioners don't. And that's a philosophical difference. So then the second critical finding is on risk and how that does not equal volatility. And, Buffett urges us really to kind of rethink how risk is defined for an investment. He states that risk is the permanent loss of capital and is not defined by volatility. And then he's got this great quote I'll share with you. He states, quote, "If somebody starts talking to you about beta, which is a measure of risk, zip up your pocketbook," unquote. And so, imagine if you're sitting in front of a client and you start talking about risk, and then you talk about beta, you kind of know that you're probably over your skis, or the client is not understanding what you're saying.
That's good. I like that.
So the third critical finding is growth is part of the value equation. Buffett believes that growth and value are indistinguishable, and they're really part of the same equation. Buffett's position is that there is really no such thing as a growth stock or a value stock, which I thought was interesting because a lot of market participants kind of segment it that way. The next critical finding, and this is really his special sauce or his recipe, is he really boils down in investing into kind of what is a business worth. So Buffett states here, quote, "We buy businesses, we don't predict stock moves." He says, quote, "We look at individual businesses, we don't think of stocks as little items that wiggle around on paper and have charts attached to them." So what he's done is, most market participants are buying, an index, they're buying an ETF, they're buying a position. But what Buffett's done is, how do you value this business? Is it attractive? And then I'm going to hold it over the longer term. And then,
hey, Christian, a question on that one. In terms of like a business is, what a business is worth. How much, or maybe just give us a little insight on like, does he have like a process that he goes through for evaluating what a business is worth? Because it sounds like it's almost like he mixes both science and almost the human element of it, like studying the people of the company. Is that true, or am I off?
He actually really doesn't, Manny, and that's the simplicity of his process, and that's what academics don't like. Academics like really rigorous statistical stuff, or they like to find things right at the decimal point. And Buffett keeps things fairly simple. So if I could sum up his process, I think his process is he's looking for a business that he can understand, either the unit economics or the sustainable competitive advantage of the product. And then from there, he's looking to buy it at an attractive price.
Okay. All right.
And I guess the last component would be, does it have a brand name? Is it known like See's Candy or like American Express, etc. So he puts those kind of three elements together. And if you're a finance teacher, it's hard to teach that, but it's really easy to teach beta. It's really easy to teach regression because it's all a formula-based model. And so I think he kind of rejects the formula-based model. So it's a very good question. but I like the beauty and the simplicity of it. So I have just two more critical findings. The one is the kind of the absence of diversification and asset allocation. You know, traditional investment managers will do a 60-40 stock bond, or, you know, international versus domestic versus bond, you know, what have you. And Buffett believes really in either being 100% in stocks or 100% in bonds. He doesn't really believe in this layering things of 60-40, 40, you know, 30, whatever. And so portfolio construction should be really driven by extreme opportunities or circumstances in the market, like March of 2020.
Right.
That really makes sense to me, but 95% of money, institutional money, is not managed that way at all,
Right.
which is very interesting. And so then kind of finally, you know, he talks a lot about different finance terms and different, you know, elements. There's a finance term called EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And Buffett says, quote, certain people have built fortunes on misleading investors by convincing them that EBITDA was a big deal, unquote. So there's a lot of finance terms that really don't make a lot of sense for the investing public to use. And that was just one example of kind of how EBITDA has you know, been a term that's learned in academic theory, but may not be useful in practice.
Well, not just academic theory too. I think EBITDA kind of changed the course a few years ago with investments and like the stock portfolios of companies, even private companies. I was working for a private company, and I was a shareholder of the company, and it was both money that I invested in, and then also as an employee, it was an employee stock ownership program as well. So I got double in, and then EBITDA came up, and all the financial advisors started saying, oh, the EBITDA is not great. And it was affecting our stock price. And it was all ludicrous. It was all make-believe mumbo jumbo. And the company was doing great, healthy, revenue, profit, the whole thing. Oh, but EBITDA was not great. So it was really, really strange. And it made most of us take our money back out of the stock. It was really weird.
Well, that's a good real world example where, you know, you can see the flaws of what people have been exposed to. So that's really the wrap up of the 6 critical findings that I found, Manny. It was a really fun process. It took me about 6 months to complete everything. I have 8 additional critical findings, but I thought I'd save those for later, because that's a whole different academic article that I wrote. But if
Brilliant.
you go to
That's great.
if you go to the last slide, this kind of summarizes, what we've done and how it looks. But Lowenstein, which is an author who wrote a whole entire book on Warren Buffett, called Warren Buffett, the Capitalist, I believe. Here's a quote from him, and he says, "In the knolls of investment, Warren Buffett stands alone. Simply by picking stocks and companies for investment, Buffett has amassed one of the epic fortunes of the 21st century." So Lowenstein really clearly identifies that Buffett is a person worthy of study. We felt the same way. We really took advantage of that unique Warren Buffett archive that really opened up right in the first year of our DBA. It's a very unique data set. And then we looked at 11 years of transcripts, and we found 6 critical findings focused on Buffett challenging conventional wisdom and academic finance, which I talked about today. And then we also found 8 critical findings focused on the concept of financial literacy, where I put Buffett in the financial literacy discussion using some of his terms, which was really fascinating. I've submitted that article to a top journal, and I'm kind of waiting to see if it gets in. So our main contribution with our dissertation research is inserting Buffett into the conversation. He provides a very unique understanding of investments and financial concepts that can improve both academic finance and financial literacy. And it really directly contradicts what is being taught in business school and what I learned in business school. So I had tons of fun doing it, and I hope your listeners have enjoyed kind of the conversation.
Yeah, well, I have to say, at least from my standpoint, I think it's fascinating. And for those listening and those on the live chat, I mean, for me, I've heard Christian talk about his research now for a couple of years, and it never gets old. Is something, there's a new nugget every single time. This is kind of the compilation of the whole thing, and I hope you do get that published. Those other eight findings. I think that would be super. It is super interesting that after all these years, we're still uncovering some of those gold nuggets from Mr. Buffett, right? It's just interesting, and that gap that you found between the academic world and the practitioner world, you know, it's just mind-numbing to think about that gap, especially on the financial side of the world. You would think that we wouldn't want such a big gap, you know, that we want that gap closed. It's interesting because before my current research study on ethics, I was looking at the practitioner academic gap in the world of
Really?
in the world of psychology. Because in the world of psychology, that gap also exists between what's taught in academic studies for being a practitioner in the world of psychology and what the actual psychologists and therapists actually do in practice. And the gap is quite large in some cases. So, but I decided not to pursue that because that would be mind-numbing as well. Now, I do have a question because what you're trying, you know, in essence, what you're doing is you're trying to close that gap between the practice of financial investments in respect to Mr. Buffett's methods and then what the academic community is teaching. So as a practitioner, I'm curious, like you now have like two hats, right? You have the practitioner hat on always with your clients, working with your clients. And then you have now as Dr. Koch, you're now kind of teaching the academics of the world, right? And trying to help that world out. So from your standpoint, after doing all this research, what way has it influenced your practice? That would be quite interesting to learn. And in terms of your pursuits going forward in the academic community, what's your interest? What's your passion there?
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this a little bit, Manny, but you know, I look at myself as kind of a practitioner scholar. And so, you know, what I do in my practice, you know, I try to put what I do kind of my academic writing, I try to put, you know, in the process with my clients. What I really would like to do going forward is, you know, teach part-time these great, you know, nuggets of information in terms of, you know, creating a class on Warren Buffett and teaching that as an option to these young kids. I mean, we have maybe 2 or 3 generations now of finance majors that are all statistically driven and have kind of missed the simple process. So I have, you know, I kind of married my practice with using Buffett's principles. I mean, I set up my practice as a value investor. We only invest in kind of, you know, Buffett-like securities, but I really feel that there's a gap of students who know of Buffett but don't really understand how to invest. And I see that time over time. And then I guess my last point is I also think it's important as an investment advisor or a practitioner how you choose your clients, because if your clients have a narrow, you know, less than 3-year time horizon, and you're buying securities based on what you think the security will look like in 10 to 12 years, then you really have a mismatch. And I really screen my clients fairly well in terms of new onboarding. I may only take 2 or 3 people a year because, you know, I find that when these opportunities come, March of 2020, you want those clients to have the emotional stability. You want them to know that, you know, we're investing in both the short term and the long term, and that they have to have some durability, because it's hard just doing it yourself. You have to have the emotional stability, let alone if you're being bugged by clients, you know, I'm losing, or, you know, my portfolio is down. So, you know, I think what's needed, to answer your question more specifically, is to have some of this research, in journals so other academics can pick it up, start different classes on Buffett, and get it more into the ethos of the finance departments and colleges and universities. Whether that'll happen or not, I'm not sure. But that's what I would like to have in, my next 10 or 15 years. I'd love to start that process.
Well, brilliantly stated, both as a practitioner and as an academic and scholar. So I will end it with that. I think that was a nice send off. So thank you, Dr. Koch. I appreciate
Sure.
your time as always. And for those who are watching, thank you for watching Mondays with Manny with Dr. Christian Koch. There was some excellent nuggets in there. Hopefully you got some pearls of wisdom there, folks. I'm going to end recording now and say goodbye to those that are watching the recording. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Manny.